Should you homeschool? That's what we're talking about. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to try to make a case for why you should homeschool and why we have decided we're going to do that. And maybe you should or maybe you shouldn't, but we're going to discuss the reasons why we came to that decision. So, Mary, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. This is a fun topic. We've spent
a lot of time. You're a professional homeschooler. You know, you've done this for 20 years and you have a lot of practice.
Wrong.
Yeah, so we have how many children? We have 4 kids, and our oldest is 4.
Yes, so we have not started at all.
Nope. No, well, you've done a little ABC stuff at home, you know.
We did just finish alphabet.
And you read them a lot of books.
We read a lot of books.
So we have a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old. So, honey, you know, about a homeschool. Is this something you always wanted to do, or is it new?
So I think that's a good question. I wanted to homeschool pretty early. By the time we met, I knew I wanted to homeschool, but I don't think I always had a commitment to homeschooling. I just think I knew I was interested in it. And then, honestly, from the time we met and it just started to, family kind of became more of a reality as I found the person I wanted to be with the rest of my life. I think I just wanted it more and more. Yeah. And I read a lot, which I think also caused me to want that more. I read books by Sally Clarkson and some others, and then talking to different family members. And so, yeah, that's where we're at for me. What about you, babe?
Nope. I thought homeschooling was weird, and that if you were homeschooled, you're a weirdo. So, sorry for anyone who's homeschooled. But now I don't think that. Now I think anyone who's homeschooled, you're wonderful and that your parents were geniuses. But yeah, it was a big transition for me, and there's several reasons of why that transition happened, and we can get into that. But did you want to share the scripture?
Yeah. So I feel like a big part of our heart and wanting to homeschool comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6 with the Shema. And it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." And so that's Deuteronomy 6:4-9. And as we have really talked about that verse over the years and unpacked it, I feel like homeschool is a great way to be able to talk on the way and not just have set aside times like we're going to talk about the Lord now, but living your faith with your kids. I think homeschooling allows for that. And something that we've loved as we've talked about it is as we're studying and reading that we can pick books as we're talking about China. We can read missionary stories. We were reading about Gladys Aylward recently, and you can really dig into a culture, but get to do it from a Christian framework. And so we're really excited about that. And I feel like it allows us to really help our kids understand that faith is not just it for a box, but do what this says, which is you're living your life and the Lord is bigger than anything that you are doing. And so, yeah, I think that's our main motivation, but we have a lot of other reasons we're interested in homeschooling. We'd like to say we drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, we're going off the deep end. We want to homeschool. But yeah, on that verse, like you're saying, one of the biggest reasons I think for anyone should seriously consider homeschool and pray about it, if it's God's will, is if we're supposed to teach our kids, you know, as we're walking on the way and we're laying down and we're sitting and all these types of things, you know, how are we going to do that if we're spending no time with our kids? You know, if you're not sitting with your kids, if you're not walking with your kids and driving with your kids and spending all this time with the kids, how are you going to actually do those things? And the average American family of once your kids are in school is send them to public school, Monday through Friday, 7 hours a week, and then often there's sports, you know, after that, and then often there's homework after that, and often there's TV time after that, and then there's bedtime. Like there's not very small room for much connection time at all.
And then you get to the weekends where there's birthday parties and you want to let them hang out with friends and all of those things, but then you've lost your time with your kids.
Other verses that come to mind is Ephesians 6:4 that says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." There's an instructing that, fathers as well as mothers are supposed to do of in training their kids in the Lord and the principles of the Lord and Bible studies and all that. And the one, I think this was a quote by Mr. Dobson's wife, is education is discipleship. And I just think that's so huge that as we send our kids off to someone else, we can't be deceived that as they teach them math and history and science and all these things, that they're not just teaching them, math principles, but they're discipling them. They're discipling how to think, how to reason, what is the truth of life, what's reality and what's not. And as they're teaching math, they're going to be, their character is going to be put off onto their other people they're teaching as well. And so as we bring it into the homeschool setting, you get to teach them about math and science and history and all these things, but you get to teach it from a biblical worldview and what does the Bible actually say about these things and how these things give glory to God. And you get to instill all these truths that, the public school teachers aren't doing, and they might not even be doing it like just not about God, but anti-agenda of God, that it's all, there's no God and there's just naturalism and all these types of things. So it's huge to think through.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is that is our overarching reason is we feel like we can follow the command of God to the best of our ability for our children and steward the gift that they are to us to the best of our ability through homeschool. And that's what we have come through with hours of conversation, a lot of reading, a lot of talking, and talking to others as well. But then with that, we also feel like it's going to be of benefit to them academically. We think that this allows us to give them more attention. And you have an education background, and you felt like being in education made you want to homeschool more.
Yeah. So let me expound on that. So like my journey from thinking homeschool is weird to thinking it's a genius idea. There's several reasons. First, one of the biggest reasons is why I didn't want to homeschool is the social stigma, of like you think of a homeschooler, you think of someone who's socially terrible and so awkward and can't connect with anyone. And that's the stigma, the mindset I had of like, if you're homeschooling, you're dooming your kid to being, abnormal. And, but some things that counter that is just interacting with homeschool families, some great ones here at the church, as well as a lot of online ones that we looked at of homeschool families where they just have awesome people that they themselves are homeschooled or they're showing their kids and their kids are really cool. And so just kind of breaking that stigma that just because you're homeschooled doesn't mean you have to be socially awkward. Yeah. That who your parents are and how they are socially really influences the kids. And then also you can give them in homeschool so many opportunities socially to, put them in co-ops and different things like sports programs and, church settings and things like that, where they're getting so much interaction and you can do homeschools with other groups of people and stuff like that, where they're getting a lot of great interaction. And when you think about your public school social interactions and you really think about that, how many of them were really great and positive and you have those friends now, how much more is there crippling of the bullying? And like we as a youth pastor, the students here at church, you can see the difference sometimes between public school kids and homeschool kids, that their public school kids have such more of a guardedness to them and like a front that they put up because they're so afraid of getting hurt by somebody. Well, homeschool kids just like bubbly and likes talking to you and things like that because they haven't been wounded so much by the public school system and just, the hard stuff that goes there. And then as being a teacher, one thing that really blew me in mind is just academically, like, I was an 8th grade science teacher, and a lot of the 8th graders were terrible at reading. We're talking about 8th grade kids. Several of them like couldn't read, like very bad, and the other ones.
And they were so smart, though.
Yeah,
they really were smart.
Other ones just didn't like reading at all, and things like that. And I don't want to have 8th graders that are like that. And in homeschool setting, you can give them such positive times with reading books, and there doesn't have to be so much wasted time. I saw so much wasted time, like as a Christian teacher in public school, I wanted the kids to excel. I wanted to help them as much as I could, but 30 kids, every hour of different kids, and there's so much chaos and so much kids being disrespectful. It was so hard for me to teach, and nevertheless like help a kid one-on-one and individually. It was so hard to help them make any real significant progress. But when your kid's at home, there's so much less wasted time of transitions, so much less discipline issues that you're dealing with, and you can really this was huge. I hated books myself growing up, and you can create an environment at your home where your kid loves to learn. And I feel like our public school system set up right now, where it's just check the box, jump through the hoop, pretend that you learned something, just memorize whatever once you memorize, then forget it. But at homeschool, you can give them the love for learning and really help them to love reading, love, whatever their passion is, that you can give them time to pursue that passion and learn about it. And so there's some things.
I think that's a good point too, that we hope that as we homeschool that it'll be able to be passion driven as our kids get older, and give them the time for that. Because the reality is we're not trying to follow a standard school day, but that in not having the wasted time, you're able to really get through your schoolwork and get that done, but then also use your afternoon, get our kids outside, let them be playing, let them be exploring, let us take them different places and enjoy it. And like you said, I think it's really important with homeschool that you go into it knowing, hey, socially, you want to make sure your kids are not just only in your home, and honestly, I think too, some pushback that you would get from homeschool is, well, if you only are teaching it from a Christian perspective, they'll never know anything else. And you're going to send your kids out into the world and they're just going to get bowled over because they have had no exposure to anything else. And I think our talk about that, it is important to expose your kids to other things, but what a wonderful thing in homeschool that it can be in a more thoughtful way. And, we hear a lot of times people say things like, well, we want our kids to be the salt and the light in public school, and we want them to be able to show Christ to their friends. And so what would you say if somebody said that?
Yeah, this is a huge, why are some of kids public
Especially
school?
because you are super pro evangelism. You are like
absolutely.
Mr. Let's tell everyone about Jesus, which is awesome. That's important. So why aren't we just sending our kids?
And I think that was a big mindset for my parents. I know my dad has said that before, that he wants us to be missionaries in the school. And I wanted to be that. I wanted to shine a light for the Lord in public school. But that's hard. I think the big thing is biblically, God, I don't think is telling us to send our 6, 7, 8-year-olds in their most formidable, impressionable times of life to go and be surrounded by all these negative influences and ungodly worldviews and things like that. That I think first they need to be, and surrounded by godly people and godly parents to raise them up in the Lord and become a strong Christian, a mature Christian, and then later teens, early adulthood, then they can go and be those missionaries that we're calling them to be. But to expect an elementary school and middle schooler to go and be missionaries in their school, I think is too big of a calling, for them, and they're going to be squashed and conform to the world instead of being different, than being that salt and light, because they haven't had the time to have their mind renewed. What is the biblical worldview? How do I stand up for Christ? What do I believe? And they're just being discipled by all these other things before they're strong themselves in what they believe. Yeah.
And what's interesting too is you pointed out age 6, but for us, and I think for a lot of people, age 5, you're sending your child in, and they're gone 8 hours a day for 5 days a week from that point on. And so I feel like it's not even just what it is in and of itself, but it's also the amount of it. Sending our 5-year-old to a gym where they're going to go do gymnastics or something for an hour a couple times a week is very different from 5 days a week, 8 or 7 or 8 hours. You're just talking about a much larger time commitment.
Yeah.
And this is not just, I think sometimes we're thinking, well, 24-hour days, but really sleep time is in there. So you are giving away the bulk of your interaction time with your kids. And I think it is important. We're not saying that we want to bring our kids home just to keep them home, not to give them opportunities to be salt and light. Children can be salt and light. We just want to really be careful, especially as our reality right now as Christians in America this is more and more of a hostile environment
Yeah.
for our kids, even here in South Carolina, where we're in the Bible Belt and there's a lot more. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, on that, the horrors of public school is something you have to consider, and that's, as a teacher in some of our local middle schools and a local middle school around here. Middle school is not the same as it was 20, 30 years
No,
ago.
it's not.
The LGBTQ agenda is very strong. As a teacher, they recommend you use the pronouns they want to use the new names they want you to call them. How confusing is that for elementary school, middle school, where to not know what a gender is? Genders are fluid now, that you can be called any identity you want to be now. Like, all that is so confusing and so a lie that we're telling as the authorities in those areas. And then kids would come to school, change in the bathroom into a different, if they're a guy, changing into a dress and being a girl, and the teachers would not tell the parents, that things like that were going on, and that kids were having sex in the classroom, and teachers, wouldn't even know that was going on, and fights all the time happening in school, all these types of crazy things, the gun violence and threats, all that is considered, and those are serious things that we shouldn't take lightly, that things like that are going on. And it definitely doesn't make me want to send my kids to public school.
No, and I think what you said too, just the sexuality of our children is being, just the innocence is being stripped away. And we are not teaching them about the gift that sex is. And instead, before they can even really think through these things, we're telling them that sex is something for any time, and it's casual, and you should be going for that. And you're surrounded by a lot of people your age that are buying into this. And honestly, if you're not raised in a home where somebody's telling you something different, why would you believe that? And honestly, maybe you are raised in a home like that, but you're surrounded by people at school that are saying something different. And a lot of times we're too busy as parents to really take the time to lean in with that. And it's uncomfortable. Talking about sex with your kids, it can feel a little uncomfortable and a little awkward. And so I think that's something too in homeschool. It's not that we're not going to have the hard conversations. We are, but we get the gift of having it with them, not somebody else having that conversation. Yeah. And then, the whole thing of first principles, that the one who talks first is often the one who is going to get more credibility in sharing. And so I think that's a really big deal, because as parents, we think that these conversations don't have to come till middle school. And that is not what's being seen. This is happening much, much earlier. Yeah. And with cell phones and all these things, kids are being exposed to porn very early.
All the time.
And they're not prepared.
Porn on school devices. I would catch people all the time, doing stuff like that.
And I think we think as parents, when this stuff comes in, we're like, well, the school can watch it. And if something pops up, like, they'll make sure they tell us. There's a lot going on for these teachers. If you have 100 kids that you're taking care of, or let's just be honest, you're trying to grade papers, you're trying to do other things. They cannot be careful all the time with this. And so I just think that's a big deal. I do just want to say, though, if you're listening to this and you're like, there's no way I can homeschool, and that's just not where I'm at, we're really hoping that this can still not be a conversation where you feel condemned, but please feel a sense of urgency that your children are in school, and that you have an opportunity as a parent to engage with them about these issues. Susan Schaefer Macaulay writes, and For the Children's Sake, that we're not to mandate what, as parents, we're supposed to be doing, whether it's private school or public school or homeschool, but rather we all need to faithfully come before Jesus and give him our kids and say, Lord, we want to do what you want us to do. And it doesn't matter if it's difficult or uncomfortable, we're going to do that. And so if your children are in public school, if you're praying, you're seeking God, and you feel like that is best, we just ask you to please take time when you're back together at home to really talk with them about what they're learning, and really use your opportunity as parents to disciple your kids, because they are encountering all kinds of things, and at much younger ages than I think what we would even imagine. And so please lean in. lean in with your children and really take that opportunity. Please don't take us drinking the Kool-Aid and saying we're doing homeschool to mean that there's nothing that you can take from this. Please, if you're not homeschooling, lean in with your kids and homeschool, not homeschool, but use your time at home as a place to really school your children and teaching them about Christ and why you love him and what does that look like. And I just wanted to mention that.
And ultimately, you want to do what is best. So you can pray, God, what is the best thing I can give my kids? And whenever the sacrifice, let's do what's our best to raise the next generation. Thanks, guys. Hope you consider. We'll see you next time.